Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're, of course, going to have another informative and incredible episode for you guys today. So hopefully you enjoy. And today's big topic is going to be asking a question and hopefully answering it. And the question is Trump actually running for president? This is an important question. Now you may say, of course he's running for president. He announced over a month ago that he was running for president. But there are things out there that are making us wonder if it's actually truly a presidential campaign. Because there are many setbacks that Trump is doing, or many things that are less than ideal about his campaign. And so we're going to discuss them today. And I want to preface this by saying that I'm still with Trump. I still support him. So this is more of a constructive criticism. So he gets back on the right track from what he's doing now, which seems to be a very dispiriting campaign, low energy campaign, you would even say. So we wanted to go over that. I think this was prompted by last week's Trump announced his own NFTs, and he had 4,500 that you could collect. And the NFTs were announced because on Wednesday, he announced this on Thursday. On Wednesday, he said he's going to have a major announcement. And a lot of people have been feeling down on Trump. They're like, we're not really getting the old energy. We're not seeing any of the magic. We're wondering what Trump is doing. Like, what's up, Trump? Come on, do us something. And people saw, major announcement. This should be really good. We're really excited about this. But people should have known there was something up with this major announcement because there is Trump as a type of Superman, an illustration of it, and with cheap stock image. And you're like, what is this going to be about? And then his major announcement on Thursday is Trump NFT cards. Now, I want to say this. They are some of the funniest stuff I have seen in a long time. I laughed so much over the infomercial where Trump said he was probably your favorite president more than Lincoln and probably the best president more than George Washington. And he was like, it's almost a parody of what an infomercial should be. It was both extremely demoralizing. I wouldn't say extremely demoralizing, but demoralizing and hilarious at the same time. When he's just showing off, he's like, these are such great illustrations. And they're so shitty. They're so shitty that they become amazing. Like, there's one where he's an astronaut, and for some reason, under his astronaut helmet, he has sunglasses on. He's got a cowboy. There's another where he's a fighter pilot, but he's also on top of the world for some reason. I mean, there's also the one where he's at the 45-yard line, which... they don't stencil in the 45-yard line, but he stenciled it in, and he's there with the football, and you're like, wow, this is so based. And in the infomercial, he clearly is not totally enthusiastic. He's like, these are, great, really great Christmas gift, and they're just like, he's like hamming it through. He's like clearly not following whatever teleprompter they have. And so it was like really funny content. I'm still laughing over these NFTs. Anytime I see one, I immediately start laughing or just like think it's funny. And so from a content perspective, it really helped out in that angle. But in terms of his campaign, it did not. And it was also bad timing because he did have a major announcement on tech policy, and it was one of the best tech policies we've seen from a Republican. It gets involved with the policy of making sure the federal government is not enforcing the censorship. Because as we've seen from the Twitter files and other revelations is that a lot of the censorship is being pushed by the federal government itself. And he would ban the federal government from being involved with this, would fire any federal government official involved, and would also withdraw federal funding from universities that censor speech, among other great things. And this is like a serious policy out there. I think it would have really excited people if it did get a lot of plaudits from people who actually paid attention towards it, as it was very serious. Actually does tackle the issue of censorship, not just in big tech, but on universities as well. And it's something that people have been clamoring for. And if he had said that was his major announcement, people would have been like, oh, it seems like Trump is on the right path. He's offering serious policies that we can rally behind. Like, this is somebody we would want to support. And, the old Trump is back that we supported in 2016 is there. But all of that was overshadowed by the NFTs because very few people paid attention to his what he said about tech censorship and his plan for that. Instead, they focused on the NFTs. And the NFTs, I will say this. Campaigns do goofy stuff to raise money for the campaigns. Even though all the people who are mainly complaining about it are DeSantis fans, DeSantis was selling baseball cards that included parts of his boots that he wore while serving overseas in the military. And those were going for well over $2,000, those baseball cards. Not even NFTs, they're just baseball cards. And the Masters campaign also had NFTs that was selling to raise money for its campaign. That is one thing. The only thing to note is that the NFTs were not for the Trump campaign. It was just for Trump. Now, I think one thing to make clear is that the divide between the Trump campaign and Trump himself is very thin, much more so than other candidates. They're essentially on the same page. And one thing that he could be doing for this is that this is raising money for his legal fees rather than his campaign, which there could be some laws about this. I mean, this is just a theory. I wouldn't, it could just be him just making money. But Trump has a lot of legal troubles over the horizon, and he needs to raise money for that. He does have a significant war chest, around $100 million. But, he's going to be in multiple legal battles that are going to cost him millions. And so he needs to raise money for that. And maybe he wants to keep the campaign funding separate. So, you could say that this is for personal aggrandizement, but at the same time, this is somebody who is facing a lot of legal problems, not just from, the federal government, but from the state attorney general. There's fights over his business. There's also the Georgia case over what he did in 2020. He's facing very mounting legal fees that he needs to pay off. And maybe he's just seeing this as, in some way it could be a type of campaign contribution by helping it with his legal fees, but it's something separate from the campaign. So I don't know what's in regard to that, but people do have these goofy things. The problem is just bad timing. As I said, it overshadowed this tech thing that he did, which is very good and something that would have really excited the base. And at the same time that his supporters, and especially online, are at a low morale point when it comes to the Trump campaign. And they're wanting Trump to do something. So you have to remember, he announced he was running for president over a month ago, November 12th, if I'm not mistaken on the date. I'm pretty sure it was, no. It was after November 12th. Man, I'm messing up my dates here, but it was after November 12th. It was the Tuesday on the week before Thanksgiving. That would have been the 15th, not the 12th. So I'm mistaken. Sorry for that inaccurate info that I put out there, fake news. So it's been over a month since he announced. And in that time, he hasn't generated the type of positive energy he needs. And even in that same week when he announced he was running for president, and Elon Musk that Saturday announced that he was reinstated Trump on the platform, it seemed like, wow, this energy is going his way. Even though he, had a lot of negative energy coming off the midterms, everyone's blaming him for the midterms, saying it's his fault. He was still going into, that week should have been a big deal for him. But it wasn't a big deal because he didn't return to Twitter. He still has not tweeted despite being on the platform for a month. He has had no tweets. And what have been the news stories since then? The Twitter reinstatement was a big deal, and that was a positive story, but he didn't come back to Twitter. Then the week after, he had the media melting down over the Kanye Fuentes meeting, which they spent well over a week obsessing over it, which seemed excessive. That was the major news story for Thanksgiving, the weekend after Thanksgiving, and even into even into the next week. So that was the next story. Then there was the media hysteria over Trump's saying we need to terminate the Constitution, which he did not really say. It was a standard Trumpian comment about the 2020 election that he's been saying all the time, but then they took it out and ran with it and turned it into this horrible thing. So that's it. And then there's now the Trump NFTs. So you're looking at this and you are not seeing the type of strong performance that you would want from Trump. And Trump has always stirred up headlines, even when he was not running for office, even when he was a businessman. He always stirred up controversy and was able to weaponize that for his advantage, and to maneuver around the media and to sell himself to the public. And he was an expert at this during the 2016 primary and to the 2016 general election. Anytime they would say, how could Trump say this? How could he do this? And then the media would bring him on. He would do his phoner interviews, the infamous phone interviews, which I don't think he's done in a long, long time. Let's say he, is saying, illegal aliens are rapists. So then the media would be like, why could you say this? And he would do a phone interview with Don Lemon, and he'd be like, well, who's doing the raping, Don? And he would then get his side of the story out there. He'd say something that the media would determine is outrageous. The media would cover it all the time, and ordinary Republican voters would say, actually, what I think he's saying is not outrageous. I think it's common sense. And then he would be given a chance to go on these media outlets, whether it's Morning Joe, Fox and Friends, or even CNN, do a phone interview, give his side of the story, and sound much more reasonable, or at least to ordinary Republicans, in that conflict. And he did this all the time, is that he would pick something that would really generate a lot of controversy, whether it was Muslim ban or something on immigration or crime or riots. And he would take that and he would, the media would go crazy over it. That's all they would talk about. They would just show his rallies live, and they would do the unintentional task of spreading his message to the rest of the country through his controversy. And he was an expert at weaponizing this and an expert at maneuvering around the media. And he was still able to do that while president. But over time, the media has figured out this strategy and has, rather than Trump using the media for his own advantage and to, using controversy and outrageous statements to do that, the media has instead been making Trump the victim of these media cycles, as that they're using these outrages to beat him down in a way that they weren't capable of doing it in 2016. Trump doesn't get that type of coverage that he did in 2016, and he's not able to respond to it as effectively before because, once again, he had Twitter all up until January 2021 where he could respond to this stuff, and also his tweets could create news. And he's not able. They were getting smarter about this when he became president, as he became more of a victim of the news cycle rather than an exploiter of the news cycle. And they beat him down all the time from, family separation policies at the border in 2018, Russiagate stuff. Obviously, COVID really, they turned him into a victim of that, is that no matter what he did, he was responsible for every single death in America. And this is something forgotten about. But when COVID was there, everyone claimed that Trump was worse than Hitler, literally, because he was directly responsible for every single death in America. Now, what were the claims for this? Well, it was because he didn't wear a mask often enough, or he, made some goofy comments early on. But now all this stuff has been buried, because now we know that how he operated around COVID was completely idiotic. And Trump had no hand in however many deaths, were there. And, CNN at that time, and I think MSNBC as well, had a death tracker. And the COVID death tracker, was all about shaming and attacking Trump. And the COVID stuff really did, convince a lot of people to vote against him in 2020. And they are even before the vaccine was announced, they were like, we're not even going to do the vaccine. It's going to be a killer vaccine. So they were anti-vax until Trump was gone. Then they became zealously pro-vax. And he became a victim of that news cycle just because COVID was affecting everybody, obviously, because everyone's stuck at home. They're not able to go out. And so it's not some like news cycle that people can easily ignore, is that, this thing is making them wear masks. It's keeping their schools locked down, their jobs shut down. And so this is directly affecting it. And then the media was able to make Trump a victim. He was still able to get his message out there, but any comment he made about COVID, especially throughout the year, they were saying that this is a call for genocide, to kill hundreds of thousands of Americans. And it's funny because, a higher number of Americans died under Biden than under Trump, if I recall correctly. But nobody blamed Biden for any of those deaths. It was all Trump's fault, and they were still trying to blame Trump for all the COVID deaths, even when he was no longer president. Now all this is conveniently forgotten due to the changed perception of what COVID was like and the lockdowns were like. But that's something that it became a precursor to now how these news cycles play out for Trump. And it's gotten worse for Trump because Trump is no longer the president. People have to pay attention to the president. He no longer has his Twitter account. You have to go to Truth Social to find out how he's responding to these news cycles or to these controversies. And the conservative media has once again turned on him. Now in 2016, conservative media was very anti-Trump, even when he was the general election candidate. They were still not that enthused by Trump, but Trump was able to go on the mainstream media and totally bypass conservative media, and also had social media, Facebook and Twitter, to get his message out there. He did not need the medium of, the mediator of conservative media to be there, to be the middleman for him to get his message out. He didn't need that. Now, without, his advantages like, CNN and MSNBC, he's not getting brought on to talk on Morning Joe. News media is not covering his statements directly as much as before, which that happened as president because there was all this liberal outrage at any time. Like New York Times, Washington Post would directly report his comments without like serious fact checkings and editorializing about how evil or wrong this comment was. And they started to demand that you cannot, Trump claims this thing happened. Now they had to Trump falsely claims this thing happened. Worst thing ever for president. And then the straight news story read like an opinion piece rather than straight news. And so they were able to, make sure that his comments were that didn't happen in 2015 and 2016. They would just directly cover his comments, report them out as straight news. But now, by the time of 2019, 2020, it came as straight as everything had to come as an op-ed on his comments. And now they don't even want, unless they can find these comments to be something used to attack Trump, they have no desire to report his comments. Only conservative media, I think the New York Post and maybe a few other places covered his tech censorship announcement. New York Times didn't at all. They don't want to have anything to pro-Trump. So they'll just continue to talk about him meeting with Kanye or him calling for the termination of the Constitution. They only want to beat him down. And conservative media is not there to defend him and help him out because they are, talk about Trump like a jilted ex-lover that they, and they're so desperate to have someone else besides Trump, particularly DeSantis, replace him, that they will echo these comments. And all conservative media was also saying Trump, they're saying the same headlines as liberal media about the Kanye dinner and the terminating Constitution. So they're all on the same side. And Trump, Truth Social is not the best way to respond to this. If he was on Twitter, I think he would be covered a lot more and he would be able to get his side of the story out there to the public much more effectively. But he's not on Twitter. And so that's a huge hurdle for Trump, is that Trump cannot conduct a presidential candidacy through Truth Social. The problem is he's probably not going to return to Twitter because Truth Social is worth nearly $1 billion, I think $800 million. That's a lot of money. And the only way it has value is if it's the exclusive social media platform for Trump. Is that the only way you can find out what Trump's saying is to sign up for Truth Social. If he went back to Twitter, that value would be completely depleted. So it's less that it's contractually obligated. It's more that Trump made a serious investment in this. It could pay off very well. And he doesn't want to go to Twitter. So he has to choose, does he want to run for president or does he want to make a lot of money? And for what we're seeing right now, it's that he wants to make a lot of money rather than mount a serious run for president. Because he does not have these avenues that he once had. I mean, in 2021, I think he could have overcome some of the social media he could have run a campaign through True Social because most conservative media was going to still be on his side. Fox News would still be talking about how awesome he is. They'd regularly bring him on. Like, he has not been on Fox News. I think he did a Tucker interview that didn't get much attention, and that was done, I believe, the week after his announcement. And since then, I don't think he's been on Fox News at all. While when he was running for president in 2016 and when in 2020, he'd regularly call in to Fox and Friends to talk. And that would create a lot of news. Like, everybody would be covering that, but, that's not happening right now. There are some attacks on Trump from the right I think are a little misguided at the point. There was 2 incidents of this last week or over the weekend. One is Trump the people who are, once again, this is DeSantis fans who would not care otherwise, is that Trump is getting attacked because he is not directly supporting Harmeet Dillon for RNC chair, and he's still, remaining neutral in the race with endorsing Ronna McDaniel. And there's also a Trump staffer who is supporting Ronna McDaniel, and they're pretty much all demanding that Trump fire this person and then openly support Harmeet Dillon to please people who will never support Trump under any circumstance. So he needs to fire his staff and make an endorsement in the race when he needs to keep any allies he wants on his side as running for president, and he can't alienate powerful forces in order to please people, the peanut gallery, who's going to hate him no matter what, even if he does something the right. I mean, I have to remember is that all these people were demanding that Trump endorse J.D. Vance. He did so. He even sent, these people praised him, at the time, and then Trump sent letters to a lot of these people thanking them for his praise, like people like David Reboy and those types. And these people a week later went straight back to tweeting about Trump as like a jilted ex-lover. So there's no point to trying to please these people. These people are using any means to attack Trump and to making all these unserious demands on Trump to alienate powerful people, all to please them who will not support him under any circumstance. And they're using this as a cudgel against him for a variety of reasons. They're even doing this over the Kevin McCarthy House Speaker thing. I get why these conservatives are making a stand on Kevin McCarthy. And most of the conservatives involved are pretty good, like Matt Rosendale and Matt Gaetz. But they don't have an alternative. I mean, Andy Biggs is not going to be the House Speaker. And the people who are realistic, Steve Scalise, there's virtually no real difference between him and Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy is more pro-Trump than Steve Scalise. He's also more willing to work with people like Marjorie Taylor Greene than I think Steve Scalise is. Scalise has no interest in the job. Stefanik would be worse. Let's going down like the list of people who may take these roles. Elise Stefanik would be worse. Jim Banks doesn't want it, and Jim Banks also lost his he was vying for a leadership position, and he lost it by a narrow vote within the leadership caucus. I believe it was conference chair that he was going for, and he lost it to a more establishment Republican. And so he doesn't even have that large support among Republicans because he lost a much lower position. So none of these people, and those are like Jim Banks and Steve Scalise are the only ones that you could say are alternatives and maybe either equal or better. Jim Banks would be better, but Jim Banks doesn't have the support, and he knows he's not competing for the job. So really, they're just kind of making a stand on this without offering something else. And they've gotten into this corner because conservative media wants to, insist that Kevin McCarthy is punished for this, which I think it's a result that nobody in the establishment has been punished over the 2022 midterms, even though all these same people want to punish Trump for it. McConnell retained his position. Tom Emmer defeated Jim Banks for that leadership role in the House, and many other similar things have happened. And it looks like Ronna McDaniel may still secure the RNC chair. So there's like all this anger over establishment, and they just want to have like, hey, we're going to make a stand here, and we're going to send a message to McCarthy. But it'd be better to wring concessions out of McCarthy than to do this, because there could be some idiotic moderate Democrat made as House Speaker, and there's not really a message sent, a good message sent if that happens. I mean, some people are going to already say cuck. It's like you have to make a stand, but I mean, unless there's like a realistic plan to have somebody else besides McCarthy, maybe they could find someone. I mean, it's not Andy Biggs. I mean, maybe if they convince Banks to be it, but Banks doesn't seem to want it. And Scalise doesn't want it, and Scalise is the exact same as McCarthy, so that wouldn't be any difference. Be much better for those 5 or so Republicans who are holding out to, here's what we want. We want these type of bills forwarded. We want, committee assignments or committee chairs for better conservatives rather than some of these guys you want. They couldn't wring concessions out of him and get what, hopefully that's what occurs. So we'll see, but I think with that, it's kind of this brinkmanship that conservative media and some others like demand. It's like, we have to show power. We can't retreat or something. And it's like the one thing that they can do, have any decision over, and the decision doesn't lead to positive results for the right, or it doesn't even strengthen their position within the party. If it causes like a Democrat to be the nominee or the House Speaker, that's going to weaken like the far right in the House chamber, and people are going to be trying to finance primary races against them over this if it leads to a Democrat House Speaker. And it's also just showing the Republican Party is that it can't operate as a force of power within Congress. So I mean, McCarthy sucks. He's not great, but it's like you have to we've been taking a lot of blows lately, so it's time to take the blows and take them and move forward and make the best of the situation. That's my thoughts on it. If people want to make a stand, I mean, that's not, I understand the reasoning, and I don't want to criticize these guys too much because it's usually some of the best congressmen who are involved in that. But at the end of the day, I think it might be better just to, move on to another battle and to wring concessions from McCarthy that he will be more right wing. And I mean, McCarthy, if he's House Speaker, he has promised time and time again that no amnesty will go through the House, and that in of itself is a victory. So, and is a huge step forward. So you got to take what you can. But back to Trump, the other little misguided attack is his event that he had with a bunch of gay Republicans at Mar-a-Lago. I probably, I'm not the biggest fan of that stuff either, but it's also every other Republican would do the same. And he had like just some generic like endorsement of gay rights, which the entire Republican Party agrees with. And even with they're claiming that Trump supported the Defense or the Respect for Marriage Act, which officially legalized gay marriage from legislatively rather than leaving it up to the courts. And Biden just signed it. He didn't really say that. It's just a blanket gay rights thing. I mean, Trump may not even really be aware that thing got passed because depending on where your news sources are, it didn't get as much attention as you would think. So he just kind of made it. These are his, like, as I said, like Trump is having diminishing levels of support. If he can find any power, like significant groups to support him, he's not going to say like, fuck you, I'm telling you to fuck off. I'm also running as the anti-gay candidate, which at that same time, if he had done that, all these people who were hitting at him from the peanut gallery, not all, I mean, there's some like dissident right people who are attacking him for those reasons, but like I'm thinking of the DeSantis stance, would then be calling him an anti-gay bigot and talking about how DeSantis is welcoming of gays. DeSantis would do the same event. So would every other potential Republican presidential candidate who, is established Republican politician. They would all do that same type of event. They'd all make that same type of generic statement. Trump has been doing this even back in 2016. It might not be ideal. If you say that this is a bridge too far, then you just can't vote for any Republican because pretty much every Republican would do the same. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene would probably say the same thing. And when it even comes to gay marriage fight and the gay fight now, or gay agenda fight, the gay fight, when that issue comes up, It's simply that we're protecting religious liberty. Like the Respect for Marriage Act, nobody is saying, no Republican politician is saying it is wrong to have gay marriage. Like, we need a country where it recognizes marriages between one man and one woman. People were saying this just a few years ago. And, 6 years ago, when gay marriage was legalized, you'd have Republican politicians who would openly state that. They're not stating this at this time. They're not even saying that we oppose gay marriage. I mean, maybe they see the polls that 70% of Americans support it, or they feel that their base doesn't care about it anymore, whatever the reason. They're simply saying, I oppose the Respect for Marriage Act because it threatens religious liberty, which there's a legitimate argument for that. But that's the only reason they're using it. And they're like, I'm very pro-gay. We love gays in the Republican Party. And then they'll just, and it's the same with the transgender stuff. It's like, the real issue is the transgender stuff in school, or transgender athletes and girls sports. And that's really just my issue. So the Republican Party has already retreated from these issues. It happened a long time ago. It happened 6 years ago in 2016. And now, like, we're pretending that it's back to 2012 when the Republican Party is universally opposed to gay marriage with like one or two exceptions. And Trump has committed this grave violation of Republican orthodoxy. And Ron DeSantis is running on a campaign to prohibit homosexuality throughout the country. That is just, delusional. That's not what's happening in the party. And so I would say this: every other Republican presidential candidate who is an established politician would be having the same event and saying the same thing as Trump. This is just another conservative media driven backlash against Trump and trying to deflate his support and getting mad for no reason because they're addicted to being mad at Trump. Like I said, I don't think it's like a great thing, but I mean, this is what's been Trump's been saying the same thing since 2015, 2016. So, and the Republican Party itself has been saying the same thing for at least 5 years. So there's not, you're getting mad at Trump doing the most basic thing that any other Republican would do. So if you're mad at him and saying, I won't vote for Trump, I'm going to vote for another Republican, you're essentially over an issue. It's like saying, oh, Trump is supporting low taxes. I'm going to go vote for the guy who is also supporting low taxes. I can't believe he would do that. That's essentially what people are getting mad about in this regard. Maybe, once again, this could be, you could say it's bad timing due to the Respect for Marriage Act getting signed. Yeah, I could see that point. But at the same time, like, Trump is having dwindling influential supporters. This is like one of the few groups of Republican groups that would go to Mar-a-Lago now. He can't just say, go fuck yourself, as like all these DeSantis stans want him to do, which then the DeSantis stans will talk about how Trump is an anti-gay bigot, even though, he's doing technically what they want. They'll find any reason to attack him. And so that's my point on this. I understand why the dissident right is doing this, but I think it's more that it's it's amnesia over what Trump was saying about this issue when he was running for president in 2016 and as president, and the rest of the Republican Party has said about this issue as well. Yeah, I mean, you could say it's a problem, but it's something deeper than Trump, and it's something that's pervasive throughout the Republican Party. So now back to the issue of Trump is actually running for president. We're trying to answer this question, and we're seeing what he's doing. He's not doing any rallies. He's not tweeting. He's doing very little media. It's hard to say, when somebody announces they run for president, you'd imagine like tons of media attention. And especially that first week, he's officially announced he's running for president. He's back on Twitter. He can have all these tweets. You'd expect that there'd be all this media attention around him. And instead there was not, unless it was for these few controversies. And so he's had a problem with that. And if he wants to show that, and the NFTs just show this as more, is that it's just, he's more focused on making money than he is on running for president. And he needs to change this around. I mean, one thing that he's probably not going to do is that he needs to tweet. He probably won't do that. Unfortunately, he needs to. He absolutely needs to. But I don't know if he's going to do that unless the federal government, there's some type of deal going through that the federal government needs to approve dealing with Truth Social. Unless the federal government shuts that down, he's not going to, I don't think he's going to return to Twitter. But there's other things he can do. He needs to start doing rallies again. He may not be doing these rallies because it's cold. It's around the holidays. Christmas is this week, later this week. New Year's is next weekend. He not immediately, but he needs to start doing a rally within a month. He has to do some type of rally just to announce that he's out there. He could say it's like cold, but he could do something in Florida. He can do something in Texas. He just needs to do something to show he's running for president and he's serious and he can hype up people. He needs to do more of these videos that he did with the tech censorship thing. If he had said, I'm making a major announcement, all the media is paying attention towards it, and it had been that video, that would have been a huge win for Trump. That would have gotten the base a lot more energized and a lot more excited for Trump, and then people, having to compliment him, even his strongest haters, like the DeSantis stance, would have to compliment it and say, this is a smart idea. He needs to start doing that now, where he's like, oh, Trump, there's going to be something big happening tomorrow. And it's, his platform on immigration, or his platform on how to deal with critical race theory and schools and government training. Those type of things can get people back on board, and maybe like a foreign policy proposal. Those type of videos is what he needs to do more of. And he needs to try to do more media. I mean, Fox News is not covering him. Fox News is covering him like an artifact. They're talking much more about Mike Pompeo and these idiots that are wanting to run for president. He needs to, I don't know if Fox is allowing him to do the phone interviews anymore, but he needs to bully Fox into covering him more and to allowing him to do these media interviews. And so the real key things is that he has to give people reasons to want to vote for him. And the ways he can do that is by doing more of these videos that he did with the tech censorship, outlining his proposal and his platform on this issue, and doing rallies. He needs to be doing rallies a lot more. The media will cover it. Conservative media will cover him doing a big rally, and he'll be much more energized at that rally than he did at his less than energetic performance at his announcement speech. If he's in a rally and he's seeing, his thousands of supporters, they're going crazy at everything he says, he'll be back in his old form, and we will be excited. And he needs to do this. As otherwise, I feel that, Trump has problems with this. I do, as I said before, the indictment, the likely indictment that's hanging over him, as I always said, he's got a 90% chance of getting indicted. It may be a little bit higher chances now with the special counsel. I think the special counsel is trying to pursue some type of sedition charges or something relating to January 6th or the 2020 election based on his subpoenas that he's been issuing recently. This is his biggest problem for running in 2024 is the indictment. As I said before, or I used to say on in this podcast, is I thought an indictment would increase his support among Republican primary voters. I don't think it will completely eliminate his support, but it's going to have a sagging effect on him, and it's also going to really drive home into people's mind is that he can't run in a general election if he's indicted. I don't think he would. I don't think he can win a presidential election while under indictment or possibly even convicted of a crime. I don't think that will win over independents. I have to say, that's just being realistic. Now, I would wish he could still win. I would hope that he could still win. But this is me, the realistic side saying it, not the hopeful side. And he does this is a major issue. And a lot of people are using, rather than saying oh, he's a loser because of the midterms and this stuff, a lot of this is just they don't want to state the obvious is that it's going to be very hard to have a presidential candidate under federal indictment running. They can't, it's not going to be a big winner among people you need a win over. So they're trying to invent these ideas oh, he's just a loser because of his ideas that he supports, that we also support. And they just really don't like Trump. And they don't want to admit that a lot of these things that aspects about Trump that the base still gravitate towards or will defend him on, whether it's the 2020 election or even the possibility of an indictment, which average Republican voter is still going to say that that's wrong and this is a witch hunt. But they, and maybe they even may support him a little bit more, but among Republican, pundits and observers and strategists, they know that this will doom an indictment that, unless he beats, maybe he would beat it before a general election. But at the same time, instead of campaigning, he's going to be in federal court fighting to stay out of jail, which, does deflate his ability to run. So an indictment, even if, it's like stupid charges that he can beat in court, it's still going to significantly hurt and hamper his ability to run in a general election. Unless the country goes to complete shit and, it doesn't matter who Democrats run, that Democrat is going to lose. That's in the only case. But even then, I'm skeptical that Trump could still pull it off. And Trump may himself be so worried about the prospect of going to jail that he then just asks the other Republican candidates to insist on a pardon, so he'll drop out, and that he will support the candidate. And the key thing is, even if Trump, for whatever reason, drops out of the race, he will still be a major factor. If he is pissed off at the Republican Party and he doesn't, he urges his supporters to not vote for the Republican Party, for the Republican candidate, because they won't stand up for him against this federal government's witch hunt. That's going to impact them. That's going to ensure that there is low base turnout, or lower than expected, or lower than needed base turnout for the 2024 general election, and will likely result in a Republican loss. No matter how awesome or epic the Republican candidate supposedly is, if they do not have Trump on their side, if they have effectively treating Trump like a pariah who needs to be purged from American life and are celebrating his indictment, Republicans are going to lose, because Trump is going to encourage his supporters to not go vote for Republicans. And if they see the Republicans banning Trump to the federal government's indictment and the federal government's war on him, they're just going to say, fuck it, why vote anyway? So contrary to expectations, or contrary to what people think, they're still going to have to play nice with Trump, and they're still going to have to be, supportive of him. And if they want to win in 2024, whether he is going to be the nominee remains in doubt. If he still wants the nomination, even under indictment, he could still win. But I think there's a change of there's a big difference between whether he can win the Republican primary and whether he can win the general election. I'm still confident if he holds out until the primaries, no matter what, he would probably still win the Republican primary. I don't think DeSantis or any of these other guys going head to head against him would do well. And I think even an indictment may help him among Republican primary supporters, even though I'm not as confident in that idea as I was before November 8th, before the midterms. But it still could be a possibility. But if he's indicted, he's not going to win the general election. That's I'm pretty certain of. So there's these questions, and maybe Trump will realize that. But no matter the case, Republican Party is going to have to be nice to Trump and keep Trump on its side, on the Republican Party side, into 2024, whether he's the nominee or not. And he's also trying to play nice with some of the Republican establishment elements who are still friendly to him, like Kevin McCarthy. There's a reason why he's supporting Kevin McCarthy for House Speaker, because Kevin McCarthy, unlike Mitch McConnell and a lot of other Republican leaders, is still very pro-Trump. And having the House Speaker on your side during a federal indictment is a good thing to have. It's a very good thing to have. So he wants somebody who he knows he can be his ally in that coming battle. And that's why it's like political pragmatism rather than it. And McCarthy will still do everything he can to please Trump, much more so than a lot of these other Republican leaders. It's probably even the same with Ron McDaniel. Ron McDaniel will probably still have to be supportive of Trump if he's indicted. Even though I'm not as confident she could betray him, I am pretty confident McCarthy will not betray him in that case. Unless there's say what you will about McCarthy and a lot of other terrible things. He knows that if he sticks the knife into Trump in a case like that the base will instantly turn on him, and so will and Republican lawmakers in the House will use that as a pretext to get rid of him. If whether it's during that term or whether it's during the next term. So the question still remains. There's a little bit of a topic I want to discuss with the primary that I'll bring up, but to answer the question, is Trump actually running for president? or is this just a money-making operation? It still remains in doubt. But I think Trump is still serious about running for president. But his plan was that he would not face any serious primary challengers. He would cruise to an easy nomination, and he wouldn't have to change anything he's doing. But he's now totally different situation now. But he's sticking to a plan that was predicated on no real opposition and no strong push to win back over or energize that base for him. But he can still get this on the right track. He just needs to do rallies. He should tweet, but I'm doubtful he'll do that. But even without tweeting, he can still put out strong messages to his supporters, like he did with that tech censorship platform and other things. And he can rally. And once he gets like some opponents who are officially announced, like Pompeo, Larry Hogan, Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, the whole list, the really serious candidates like Ron DeSantis and Tim Scott, which I'm going to go into Tim Scott in a moment. They're going to wait to announce. But if he has these people who can be easily turned into hateable, detestable figures among average conservatives, he will have a strong shot and he will push himself up and elevate himself back to the old Trump. So I still think he can turn this around and have a successful primary. But the other question is, what will happen with an indictment? That's a completely other question. But we'll keep a lookout on that. But I want to go to the Tim Scott question, because a lot of people are skeptical that Tim Scott is a serious candidate, that he would actually do well in a Republican primary. They're like looking at the polls. It's like, Tim Scott's polling at 1%. How could he be a serious candidate? I don't think people want Tim Scott. It's like, I think a reason why Tim Scott is at a low percentage is that the idea of him running for president hasn't fully solidified in a lot of Republican voters' minds. He has not been talked about as one of these candidates. And even Fox News and talk radio, they're not really talking him up as a candidate. They talk up, it's pretty aware to people who consume conservative media that Mike Pompeo is running. Nikki Haley is running. Nikki Haley's been running since she left her UN ambassador role. Like, that idea of her running is there, but people still don't support her and still don't support Pompeo. Larry Hogan and all these people, it's much more aware that these people are running for president and what they would do. Tim Scott, I don't think it's awareness. I think if he officially jumps in, he has a lot of advantages. One, he's a black Republican. People want to doubt this or say that it won't be a serious factor. You have to remember is that Herman Cain and Ben Carson were not politicians at all. Herman Cain was an obscure businessman. He was pretty charismatic, and at one point in the 2012 primary, he was the front runner. Then a bunch of scandals came out about his personal life and other things, and his poll numbers went down. But at the time, just some random businessman who's a black Republican, who's a pretty good speaker, was the front runner. Ben Carson, not even a charismatic speaker, not a good voice at all, and not very articulate when it came to political matters, was very briefly, for like a week, a front runner in the 2016. He was the only person who ever overcame Trump in the polling. And for about a week or a few days, there were about 2 polls that showed him either neck or neck or like a 1 or 2 points ahead. Ben Carson was not like a charismatic, but he didn't do well when the primaries actually showed up. But imagine both those candidates had disadvantages. One, they weren't strong fundraisers. They weren't established Republican politicians. And for Carson's case, he didn't have any charisma. He's a strange person. But the fact that they were black Republicans was able to get them a lot of support. Now imagine with Tim Scott, who is one of the best fundraisers in the Republican Party, who is an established politician, well-respected and very much liked by the Republican leadership. And when Politico, I believe it was Politico, interviewed a bunch of these prominent Republican senators about the idea of Tim Scott running for president, they were ecstatic over the idea. Very rarely do you see Republican senators openly talk about how awesome it would be for someone to run for president. They wouldn't say that about Josh Hawley or Ted Cruz, but they're very excited about this. And when he actually announces and there's more media attention towards him, he's going to jump up to double digits. Now, whether he would be the front runner is another matter, but he would definitely be a serious challenger in the race. He, more than Pompeo, more than Pence, more than a lot of these other guys that people imagine as running for president, would be a more serious contender. The only three serious contenders I see right now are Trump, DeSantis, and Scott. I do believe there is a fourth one who I have not really identified yet, or, it has to really come up for when the primary is there to see who that was. There's like surprising people. Like, think about the Democratic primary. Nobody would have thought Pete Buttigieg would have been a serious candidate, but Pete Buttigieg won the Iowa primary. Nobody thought that before the race. They're like, why is this guy running? But once the campaign started up, he got a lot of support. So, campaign primaries sometimes work that way. And if Trump is, for whatever reason, no longer in the primary, it will set up a very different dynamic that other candidates will emerge and maybe gain some popularity. Maybe it could be, I really don't see it with Pompeo, but I'm not fully ruling out with Pompeo. I don't really see it with Pence, but maybe he could be the fourth guy, or maybe it's just somebody who hasn't announced yet. But the three serious contenders I see are Trump, DeSantis, and Scott. And if it became a DeSantis versus Scott race, we had to go all in on DeSantis. I have my problems with DeSantis, but without Trump in the race, unless for some reason Carrie Lake got in, I don't think she would. I think her best chance is running for the Senate in 2024 in Arizona. I don't, there's really not somebody else who would run. So I'd be a reluctant DeSantis supporter in that case, and more just to prevent Tim Scott from running. But a lot of people are saying like Tim Scott would never get any support. The only thing that will make Tim Scott not a serious contender is if he doesn't run. But if he runs, he is going to be a serious contender. He is going to gain double digits in the polls. He is going to be somebody that they're going to talk about as somebody who is a realistic, strong candidate. Whether that'll translate into maybe DeSantis could blow him out without Trump, maybe not. I think that he's a much more serious and stronger candidate than people understand and realize. So that's my on talking about the presidential cycle and 2024 primary. I now want to talk about looking beyond 2024 and even looking into the 2030s. That's going to be the topic I want to discuss. And I had a Twitter thread about this subject. The subject is that of the possibility of an American Hugo Chavez. And Hugo Chavez was a left-wing populist in Venezuela who America really didn't like. And there's still the chance for this quasi-revolutionary left-wing populist to become very popular and potentially even win the presidency. You could say that this is a revolutionary threat, but in a uniquely American perspective. Like, I think whenever somebody thinks of revolution, it's something completely outside the system. Just one day, all the people show up and overthrow the government. And most revolutions, that's not how it is. It's usually somebody within the system, and then they push, other elements out of these institutions, and there's violence involved and some of these other things. But Hugo Chavez is very likely due to the trajectory of America. The American Chavez would be the multiracial working class that the right loves to talk about, but it wouldn't be based at all. And it wouldn't be direct, unlike Bernie Sanders, where a lot of his anger was just delivered at the ambiguous billionaires. This would be directed at white supremacy or white America and whites themselves. It also would include the billionaires, but it would be this whole system of white supremacy that we have to take down, and we have to redistribute the white wealth. And there is a base for this because we are having more and more low-skilled immigrants come to this country, and a lot more of these immigrants are working shitty jobs like, Uber drivers. I mean, those are the ones coming legally. Farm pickers, all the type stuff in the service sector. It's a type of working class that most people on the right would say is not the real working class, or these anti-woke leftists would say is not the working class. But this is the new working class, like the service sector and those sorts. That is the new proletariat. It's the people working at Chipotle rather than, a skilled laborer making a middle class wage, such as, a plumber who's making $70,000 a year versus somebody at Chipotle, who you will say that those people working at Chipotle are not the working class, but the guy, the plumber, depending on his area, earning a very good income and owning a home and otherwise living, like a middle class person besides, his profession is not usually typically considered working class or middle class rather. Otherwise he's a standard middle class person. And this group would be very diverse. It would have blacks, Hispanics, the various like South Asians and Southeast Asians who come over here recently who maybe are not doing so well in the economy, along with the growing element of white lumpen proletariat and lumpen bourgeoisie. There's a different lumpen proletariat. I would say is these are people who come from a genuinely working class background, and they are criminal element, or like the people thinking of that, like some of the people that Kyle Rittenhouse shot in Kenosha, those would say more lumpen proletariat. But there's also a lumpen bourgeoisie element, which is a thin line, is that they both are like burnout losers, drug addicts, not doing anything in life. But the lumpen bourgeoisie are a lot of these kids who grew up in more middle-class, stable incomes. Think of like the average Chapo listener, and they're complete losers. They're looking at a Starbucks. They failed out of their community college, and they generally, don't have any real prospects in life or in their career. And there's a growing number of these people, and these people really make up Antifa. And Antifa is very well organized. Like, everyone wants to talk about the right and its like revolutionary capacity and violence. It's like right-wing revolution is on the horizon, yet the right has no real street presence whatsoever. The right considers all of its street activists feds. There's the only example of right-wing violence is January 6th, which everyone now considers as a Fed op, and that, the right couldn't have done it itself. And ever since then, there's been no example of right-wing violence of organized. I mean, there's still these like idiots and nut jobs who do these mass shootings that claim some political motive, but really it's just antisocial, nihilistic violence committed by some weirdo, and he uses a political means to describe something he would otherwise do as being a maniac. For comparison's sake, Antifa is able to bring out armed militia to protect, quote unquote, protect some drag queen story hour at a moment's notice. They're able to organize riots, as we saw in 2020. They are able to organize harassment and pressure campaigns in the real world outside of the online sphere. And they're able to call up like a large base of support. I had a tweet about this last week. I was saying, why is there no right-wing street activism versus left-wing street activism? And this plays into the role, an argument I have to say is that there's more of a revolutionary threat from the left than the right. Because the right is still full of people who are landed or have things to lose. Like, they have real jobs. They have houses. They have families. They have things to lose. They're not about to throw this away by getting in a street brawl. And yes, there is the system is more likely to crack down on right-wing street activists than left-wing street activists. But even without that thing, there is just not this huge base of support or of potential street activists to come out. It's not like you're going to go into your cul-de-sac. It's like, hey, we're going to go fight Antifa. And they're like, no, my wife has got something. I got to go pick up my son from baseball practice. These are people with something to lose. And this even pertains to the working class too, because the right-wing base is middle-class suburbanites and high-skilled laborers. Like, those are the core supporters. It's, from anyone from like a small business owner to an HVAC repairman, it's people who are plugged into the system, so to speak. I don't want to say like they're system subservient to the system, but these are people who have things to lose, and their economic situation is much better than it is of the base for far left support, which is either, trust fund kids who don't even have to worry, but that's like a very narrowed margin. There is a very popular base of support that, they can be organized into a people's militia to cause violence and riots. I mean, They just need leadership and organization and something to push forward. Now, if you had a presidential campaign of Chavez or somebody like, these whites are taking all our stuff. Look at their nice little neighborhoods and look at how you suffer. Look at how they have all these 401ks and you have no money to save. We need to take that stuff back. We don't need just reparations for blacks. We need reparations for all working people from the white middle class. This message would resonate with a lot of people. It would resonate with black community, not all Hispanics, but resonate with a lot of Hispanics, particularly the more recent immigrants here. Some of those people may not be able to vote, but they would be there. And also this lumpen bourgeoisie, lumpen proletariat among whites is that base of support. And it would be very appealing to the kind of idiotic shitlibs who make up the Democratic primary, who feel guilt for being white and feel guilt for having money. And like, this person's just so great and so charismatic. This person would not be a Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom would not call for massive economic transformation or massive economic redistribution outside of reparations. That's another matter. This would be somebody who would try to upend the system and would not follow laws, would say, like, we need to repeal the Constitution because the Constitution was made by white supremacist slave owners, and it would be calling forth this base of discontents against the white middle class and demanding a redistribution of wealth in order to make America more equal and more diverse. Now, some say this may be too realistic, is that the left is too co-opted right now. And it's true. The far left is like, these Antifa are like the most loyal foot soldiers for the system. I mean, they even aggressively attacked, anti-vax protests and anti-lockdown protests. But outside of that, I mean, they are a little bit too much motivated by anti-right animus rather than supporting their own agenda, and so they'll sometimes turn into loyal foot soldiers for the system. But there can easily be transformed because their economic situation is going to be worsened over time, especially with the service sector and the gig economy. And it's like there may be some apolitical people who are not those who are going out for Antifa protests and all their things, but they're working in Amazon, and most of these Amazon workers are not blue collar white Trump supporters. They're usually black and immigrant, and as seen in all these unionization efforts, and these people claim that they're exploited. Now and there's also the gig economy and all these other sectors of the economy where there's a growing number of people who are there who feel that they're exploited, and they are generally leftists if they can vote. I mean, there's like based Uber drivers, I guess, mostly immigrants, but all the ones who can vote, who could definitely vote, are usually huge shitlibs and Bernie supporters. And the system wouldn't be thrilled with this development. In 2016, they were very much worried about a Bernie Sanders possibly getting the nomination. They probably were worried in 2020. Whether it's more worried than Trump securing another term, in 2016, I thought the generals and the military industrial complex would be more worried about a Bernie, especially if he tried to attempt some of his radical social reforms. But Bernie is ultimately a pussy. He was a pushover, and you really need this young Chavez. This person would probably be some type of non-white, whether likely a Hispanic, have to be male because it's not going to be AOC. AOC's too bought into the system, and female politicians in America are not capable of being that type of populist, especially if they go towards the left. Like the women who are drawn to left-wing politics and running for office are front row kids. They are strivers. Even AOC is a striver. So it would be someone who, it'd probably be a Hispanic, youngish Hispanic, maybe some type of off-white, maybe like a Persian or maybe even an Armenian or Turk or something of that sort. Likely not white. I mean, maybe because the whites who get into this stuff are total like soy boy, soy jacked, like balding at age 21. They're not gonna, fat a dad bod at age 21. They're not the types to do it. It'd be really like an alpha Chad, likely Hispanic, who would deliver this strong message. This person could be, like a city councilor in Chicago right now or somewhere of that sort, and could be developing these radical ideas. It could be a black guy as well. But I'm a little bit more skeptical of that prospect. And this guy would be out there, you know, it would not be, he would try to sidestep the intersectionality that prevents a lot of this stuff. Like, he would be fine with pronouns if people insist on it, but it wouldn't be a main focus. And he would be trying to, you know, keep out the really nutty elements to this more anti-white left-wing populism that would really, you know, excite a lot of these left-wing base. And it'd be used, and in power, it would probably be more destabilizing than Trump would be in power, and the system would respond in an interesting way. And I think this would offer opportunities, because when people are threatened, you know, we talk about how the right is not in a revolutionary mood and our base is not in a revolutionary mood. It makes sense why, because even with all these bad things that are happening in the country, you know, they got transgender stuff in their schools, anti-white racism in the schools, you know, the border crisis. With all that said, people are still able to achieve a middle-class lifestyle in America. And the people who are achieving that middle-class lifestyle are generally more of our base than others. These people, at the end of the day, when they say, like, I really don't like what's going on, but, you know, I have a family to take care of, I got investments to make, you know, I'm too tied in to attempt anything really radical. And, you know, and some of these people may not even see anything wrong. They're like, that's too bad, but you know, what I'm mainly worried about is low taxes and, you know, my ability to have a more secure middle class lifestyle. And so this keeps people, you know, fine with the status quo. As long as they can still afford consumer goods, as long as football's still on the TV and other things, you know, they'll be content, relatively content. But if they know that there's this real threat to somebody who is going to steal their property, steal their money, and, you know, even possibly cause violence to these people, that is going to have a different effect. That will have a radicalizing effect on these people. And that will even have a radicalizing effect on the institutions, because these institutions will have to choose. Do they want to be eliminated by American Chavez, or do they want to restore order? Do they want to beat back this menace? And if they see the immigration connection to this menace, that a large number of these people who are supporting it are new Americans, then that can create more support for immigration restriction and a lot of other things as well. And so this is something, and also this person could directly challenge the system if they were president, because he could, you know, say if things happen in the way with Trump, like the military says, no, we're not going to do this, or the Department of Justice says, no, we're not going to do this, or a court overrules some law, he can call out a people's militia to intimidate. You know, they had nationwide riots over George Floyd. Now imagine if there was one man, the president, could call upon that. That'd be serious levels of power, and our system would be shaken up by that. Now, this may not happen in the way we think it is, but left-wing radicalism, left-wing populism, and it's influenced by anti-whiteness, is going to be a more prevailing trend in the Democratic Party going forward. You may not see those leaders right now. Maybe some of these people are kind of idiots. I mean, if you look at like the Squad and those types, I mean, they're stupid, but you're going to see developing leaders from that. And there is going to be that growing base of support for it, just how the American economy is developing, our immigration system is developing with all these illegal immigrants getting in, and just even the nature of how these left-wing militants and Antifa can operate with impunity. This stuff is going to grow a lot more over time, even though we now see that a lot of these Squad types got co-opted by the Democratic Party. There may be, in a few years, people who are not totally co-opted by the Democratic Party, and they become quite popular among elements within the Democratic Party or Democratic base. And for the far right or nationalism, this is more of a white pill, because from the perspective of really a thing we need is the specter of left-wing radicalism in order to encourage people to take up our side. Because ultimately, there needs to be a real threat to people's lives and property. Maybe not lives, but their property and their income and their livelihood. to really have that effect of people gravitating towards our ideas. Because right now they see like, well, I see all the rap music on TV. I see like every advertisement's interracial couple. But at the same time, I'm watching this from a nice TV in my nice home with my nice wife and nice kids. And ultimately that keeps me in there. And for most of the right, all the revolutionary talk is just guys who are living that lifestyle, and maybe they're henpecked by their wives or they're divorcee, and they get online and otherwise they're just the standard middle class, guy who no threat at all. But then they like, I'm a future ruralite warlord and we're going to definitely have a revolution. It's more just like they want a revolution so they can deal with their wife's divorce lawyer or deal with their alimony payments. Like it's more fantasy and LARPing and more of a role play game than left-wing radicalism, which left-wing radicalism translates to things in the real world, while ours just translates into people getting extremely mad at my mentions when I say, maybe you should turn off the NFL. Like that's all right-wing revolutionary action, is just getting mad at my mentions about various takes I may have. So I don't really take the threat of right-wing revolution seriously because there's no base up for it. There's no examples of this occurring outside of January 6th, but we haven't had a repeat of January 6th. And the mentality of the right is to assume that any street activism is fed op. Everything's a fed op except for posting about revolution on Twitter. And so it's like it's more like harmless entertainment for these guys. And the only way to really push like America into like a right-wing dissident right direction is to have that specter of left-wing radicalism that can, take away all their money, take away their homes, and, threaten violence at them with like this minority coalition just seeking the spoils and taking the spoils of America. So that's my thoughts about it. I'm going to develop more of this concept over time. Somebody has encouraged me to write an article about it, so I may have an article about it in hopefully before the new year, but we'll see when it happens. So I'll develop this over time. But I think this is I do think this is a very realistic possibility on the left. We may not have a single figure that's like a Chavez, but we will have a Chavez-like element within this left-wing populism. But the difference between it and Bernie is it's going to have more balls, not in a positive meaning, but in more that it's more willing to fight the Democratic establishment, and it's going to be far more anti-white and much more minority POC in character. So now on to the Cognitive Elite questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions if you sign up for the Cognitive Elite option at Highly Respected Substack, and that's at highly-respected.substack.com. And make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements if you haven't already. The first question comes from Jay. Jay asks, you mentioned academic agent in your last podcast, who's this guy I brought up who's like half Persian, half British. Some people don't like him, whatever. That's regardless. But Jay asked, one of the things you said about the Twitter files and Rogue Capital in general is that you think the pressure for it is coming from the employees and two activist groups. And according to Academic Agent, you mentioned, he points to BlackRock and Vanguard as major driving forces behind the ESG climate change agenda. I guess my question is, are the ESG and woke agendas coming from the same source, or are they different interests? Is the woke agenda being pushed by Vanguard, BlackRock at all? Well, it is being pushed by Vanguard and BlackRock, but who is pushing Vanguard and BlackRock to do this? I don't know if it's the employees, but there are employees within that company who are doing that. It's a little bit different from big tech, is that they think it will generate goodwill among, left-wing activists who may try to, do more taxes on them and stuff. There is some true belief. I don't think the CEOs just like one day came up and was like, we're going to push this stuff because it's more effective for capitalism. In some ways, it hurts their bottom line. I think it's the same sources for their push as it's coming from everywhere else. And all these people doubled down on this stuff because of George Floyd. Now, the environmental stuff, that is coming from a lot of these governments and NGOs. Not so much from America. America is having a little bit of pressure on that, but especially Europe. They're going so insane with this environmental stuff. And, these are international financial firms that they, they feel the pressure from government as well to do some of that stuff with the climate change, etc. But the social policies, they view this as society wants these ideas, as what happened with George Floyd, what happened with this outcry that we need more diversity and you need these racial quotas and all these things to happen. As that they feel pressure from outside forces. It's not so much the corporations are the source of the pressure, it's coming from the same activist groups and also the government. And in some cases, the employees, I don't know if it's so much coming from the employees when it comes from the financial firms, but it is the case with Twitter. So the third thing I would put there with employees, activist groups that you say is that a third is the government. And I think that can explain why Vanguard and BlackRock are pushing this. I don't think that this is directly sourced from them. I think, they're definitely pushing this. But are they pushing this as their CEOs just one day came up with this and they're like, evil financial capital is the one, we need to do this? Or is it because of pressure they're feeling from activist groups in the government? I would say that the bigger rather than the CEO just coming up with it one day, I think it's coming from pressure from the activist groups and the government, that why they're doing that. So are they coming from the same source, or are they different interests? I would mostly say they came from the same source. All these activists in the governments advocate for greater racial diversity in their hiring practices, as well as with the climate change stuff, and they're coexisting interests. They go along. So that'd be my answer to that. Maybe not as in depth as you may want, but that's that'd be my answer. I don't really view. I think if you had a different institutional framework in America, if you had a different set of values, that these companies would not be pushing that, and they're responding to whatever they believe is the respectable elite opinion, and that we need to do this to look good and moral. And a lot of that is set by activist groups and the government. So that's my answer to that. And the second question, it comes from Tim. Tim asks, Scott, why are you a truth cuck, or not a truth cuck? It's like, why do you disbelieve the JFK theories? And it was actually asking about, because JFK is back in the news, the JFK assassination conspiracy theories are back in the news. For some reason, leading up to like a Tucker announcement, people were like talking about how the deep state took out JFK for the same reason they took out Trump. And then Tucker had an announcement saying that someone at the CIA texted me saying that, I asked him, it's like, do you think there's a CIA role? And he's like, I think so. And thus, everyone's now talking about JFK. If you had listened to the podcast I did 2 years ago with Thomas77, you would know that Lee Harvey Oswald likely acted alone. And he did this because he was a left-wing nut job. There are weird things about it, mainly with the Jack Ruby thing. But one thing that has to be said with Jack Ruby is like he was definitely trying to silence him. Now, I think from our perspective, totally divorced from 1963, that makes it the more likely outcome. It's like, why would a random person just go up and shoot this guy? Now, and most people who are pretty much everyone listening to this right now was not alive in 1963. We may have some few older people out there, but the boomers who are listening to this, we respect you if you are. But most people listening to this podcast have no memory of the assassination and what America was like then. But most people do have a memory of 9/11. Now imagine 9/11 happens, and they somehow a hijacker had parachuted out and before hitting the thing. I don't know how that worked, but regardless, we have this. There was a supposed hijacker who was supposed to be on there, but he got arrested beforehand. I forget his name, but let's say it's one of the guys who actually hijacked the plane, and this person parachuted out for whatever reason, and he was immediately arrested. And let's say he was paraded before the public after 9/11. And no bulletproof vest or anything. He's paraded before. There's a good possibility, due to the anger and outrage that we felt, that all Americans felt over 9/11, that someone would bring a gun and try to shoot that person. Absolutely. And the same was with JFK's assassination. That was just as devastating for America as 9/11. All the news outlets were covering it. People were really upset about it. People were angry. There was fears that it was a Soviet, conspiracy theory. There was fears that it was a right-wing conspiracy theory. And, people were just mad that someone would do this to the president. And people were shocked. And so there's a lot of people out there who would just kill Lee Harvey Oswald just because for shooting the president. And I think that was maybe there could be something else, but it is a plausible theory. And I think it's harder from the distance of time to understand what America was going through at that moment and how much anger there was at this lone shooter that he would dare kill the president, is that and they're demanded immediate justice for doing such a wrong thing. And Lee Harvey Oswald was definitely involved in the assassination. I mean, he killed a policeman who tried to arrest him afterwards, and all these things delivered the fatal bullet. I think with all these conspiracies that go, whether it's like CIA, Mossad, right-wing thing, one of the things that I think it became so popular on the left, and I think this is similar how 9/11 Truth took off as well, is that the story, or the cover story, as you will, as some people would disbelieve, gives a right-wing message of what happens. JFK, he was shot by a left-wing lunatic. Left-wing lunatics are a menace. 9/11, 19 immigrants come in, Muslim immigrants come in, and thanks to our idiotic immigration system and our tolerance for Islam, they're able to inflict massive damage on America. Both of those things support right-wing messages or right-wing ideology. But the left has decided that no, these people were patsies for an evil right-wing conspiracy done by the CIA. And I think some of the right, for justifiable reasons, or understandable reasons, have increasing hostility towards the CIA, and so they adopt it. But it doesn't fully work out for the right, so sometimes they have to add an Israel element to it to make it more based or controversial. But no, I've looked at the evidence from the Israel angle. Is that JFK was about to stop Israel in its tracks, and he was a great enemy of Israel when in fact he had pushed American foreign policy into a much more pro-Israel direction rather than trying to be even-handed in the Middle East between the Arabs and Israel. He was far more of a friend to Israel than Dwight D. Eisenhower. Dwight D. Eisenhower stopped war or an invasion that Israel, France, and Britain had joined in during the Suez Canal crisis. They did not kill Eisenhower over that, even though that was a strong push against Israeli interests. And before the assassination in 1963, they had reached a deal over inspections, the Kennedy administration and Israel. And even though they always say that LBJ was one put in to end the inspections, LBJ continued to carry out those inspections of their nuclear sites, but due to the Vietnam War and other foreign policy concerns, he wasn't pressing it as much as JFK. And even if they wanted to destroy JFK, they could have just, shared all of his adultery, especially involvement with mob mistresses and others. The mafia probably was smart enough not to assassinate a president. Is like the mafia doesn't like killing civilians, like just random people who are not involved in the criminal underworld. I don't think that they would go as far as to kill the president, and I don't think the CIA and FBI would cover for them. The CIA, which mainly is the theory, is that Alan Dulles was so mad about getting sacked over Bay of Pigs that he retaliated. Alan Dulles was in a weak position at that time, and the CIA, and even the CIA under Alan Dulles, had bungled so many operations that they were not these hyper competent people that could pull off an assassination of the president with nobody noticing. I just think for ultimately the right wing to think that it's very important. It doesn't convey a right wing message, and then it carries on to that the evil people killed RFK as well, Robert F. Kennedy, who was, even ran one of the most left-wing presidential campaigns up until that time. It was all about racial equality. It was all about, very left-wing stuff that he was campaigning on. He was even more pro-Israel than his brother, and he was killed for his Israel stance by a Palestinian. But for some reason, they now think that RFK was about to be an incredibly base president and he was killed by Mossad or evil CIA for some reason. And so this just like carries on. And I could even see right wingers saying that they killed CIA Mossad killed MLK to divide the races from or something. That's apparently like a right wing position now among some people. So people just get into these conspiracy theories. I mean, you can believe them. There is something, the American public thought that there was some Soviet conspiracy theory out there. This might be a Soviet conspiracy when it first happened, but ultimately, Kennedy was not a threat to the powers that be. He was a rather ineffective president outside the Cuban Missile Crisis. He couldn't get bills passed. People didn't really take him that seriously. He was very much in a divided position on what to do on a lot of issues. He was not going to disband the CIA. He was not going to disband the Federal Reserve. Those are just tall tales. Even with Israel, I think Israel felt that they could eventually, through the normal process, not have to worry about him ending their nuclear program. Nobody was really particularly threatened by JFK, and he was assassinated by a lunatic, as in the case with all these other presidents. It's like nobody always talks about how the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan was a secret coup of some sort, a CIA plot. Maybe it's because he survived, but there's a ton of maniacs out there. We can see that with mass shootings and other cases. There's tons of maniacs out there. And they will try to kill the president, and if there's lax security, it will happen. And so I ultimately blame Lee Harvey Oswald. Even if you go into the rabbit hole of the conspiracy theories, that it ultimately you have to ultimately believe that JFK was extremely based and was about to deliver all these right-wing goals before he was assassinated, and that's just totally divorced from reality. He himself published a book that was ghostwritten, or he put his name to a book that was ghostwritten and published by the Anti-Defamation League. And he was a nation of immigrants that supported, more liberal immigration laws. He was for pretty much everything that we cared about at that time. JFK was on the opposite side of. And he was a handsome president, I guess. He had a nice fitness program for high schoolers, but outside of that, he was not a good president. He was rather a bad president. And he didn't threaten the powers that be, and that's why I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald ultimately acted alone in killing JFK. So that's going to be a controversial take, but that's the take I'm going to end this podcast on today. For next week, we have an interesting thing. I am not going to be publishing a podcast on Monday because it's the day after Christmas. I'm going to be enjoying the Christmas spirit and not having a podcast that day. I would say it could come out Tuesday, but I may just do one free IQ supplement of 2022 and review, and that would cover both the IQ supplement and Highly Respected next week, depending on the schedule. So it'll be a little bit of a different schedule. So no Highly Respected for next Monday, but it may come out Tuesday, and we may have the same schedule with IQ supplement, regular episode, depending on what news happens. If there's so much news happening and I want to talk about the subject throughout this week, that I may just have a regular episode and then do an IQ supplement of 2022 and review. We'll see when it happens. So just keep that in mind. It may be a little bit of a different schedule, but we'll be back onto the same schedule. I think it's going to be a federal holiday on that Monday, January 2nd, the day after New Year's. But we're still going to be working. We'll be back on our normal schedule into the new year. But we're also going to have an incredible IQ supplement this week. We're not taking IQ supplements off this week. It'll be on Thursday. Actually, I already have the topic. It's going to be about right-wing counterculture and the prospects of it. I had a great thread on that generated some interesting replies and some anger. We're going to do a discussion on that topic for next week or later this week for the IQ supplement. So tune in for that. So until next time, stay respected.